Okay, take some time right now to get your notes set up and labeled with the title. This is for GG7. We are adding and subtracting rational expressions. So let's do a quick example. If we have 3 over 10 plus 2 over 5, and I want to add them, I need my denominators to be of the same value before I can add my numerators. So I'm going to think of 10 and say, well, that's 5 times 2. So this is missing the 2. So I'm going to multiply by 2 over 2 so that my denominator now is 10. So the 3 over 10 stays the same, but 2 times 2 is 4, and 5 times 2 is 10. This would still reduce back to 2/5 because it keeps the same value, it just looks different. And now that we have the same denominator, I can say, well, they're all comparing to 10, and now we have 3 plus 4, which is 7 over 10. We're going to do that same thing, but now we're going to add variables to the mix. So sometimes we'll have a monomial, and sometimes we'll have a polynomial. But our first example is going to be, we have 2 divided by y squared z, and we are subtracting 2 and dividing by 9y cubed z. Okay, so it gets a little bit confusing sometimes to see what each denominator needs in order to make them the same. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to list out this denominator is y times z. And this denominator, I'm going to put the y's first just so that I can see them. Y times y is y cubed, z, and also a 9, which is, we can break 9 down to 3 by 3, but we don't have to if we don't want to because there's no number in the other one. So y, and z cancel, which means that this fraction right here is missing a 9 and a y. So I'm going to multiply by 9y top and bottom. Okay, so when I do that, 9y times 2 becomes 18y. And if I've done my math correctly, then our denominator should be 9y cubed times z, because if I add a 9 and a y to this denominator, because we're multiplying, I have 9y to the 1, 2, 3 cubed times z. Now I didn't have to multiply the second one by anything, but I have to remind myself that I am subtracting here. So I put the minus 2 here, and that's all we can do. We can't factor anything else out, so we are done. All right, so let's look at our next example. We have 7 over x plus 2, and we are adding 8 over x squared minus x minus 6. Well, I can't factor this into anything, so this is just going to stay x plus 2. But I want to factor this. So two numbers that multiply to negative 6 but add to negative 1 are negative 3 and 2. So this is x plus 2 and x minus 3. So see how the x plus 2 is already in both denominators? That means that my first fraction, I'm going to shift this over a little bit, is missing the x minus 3. Well, what I multiply top, I have to multiply bottom by, because technically I want to multiply by something that would reduce to 1. Okay, so my first fraction, I'm going to go ahead and distribute the 7. So that's going to become 7x minus 21. Okay, and then my denominator will be x minus 3 and x plus 2. Since it's the same for both, I can put them as 1. And I'm going to put the plus 8 next. That can combine like terms on top, because negative 21 and 8 would become negative 13, and then x minus 3 and x plus 2. If that numerator happened to become like either x minus 3 or x plus 2, then I could cancel from here, but for right now, we don't have that. Okay, our next problem, we have 8x plus 6 minus 4 over 3. So if we want to make this into one fraction, then my only denominator right now is a 3. Technically everything else has a 1. So we're going to multiply each of these by 3 over 3 and by 3 over 3. And I'm going to go ahead and add the 1 on the denominator so it's easier to see. So my first fraction would become 24x. Then the second number would become 18, and then minus 4, and now my denominator is all 3. I do have like terms here, so 24x, 24x plus 14 over 3. Now, if all of my numbers could reduce by 3, then we could simplify this, but they can't, so I'm just going to leave it like this. All right, let's do one more. We have 10w divided by w minus 9 plus 3w. Okay, so in order to get a common denominator here, my common denominator would be w minus 9. And right now my denominator here is a 1, so I'm going to multiply this whole thing by w minus 9 over w minus 9. Okay, so my denominator will be w minus 9. The 10w doesn't change because it didn't multiply by anything, but this I'm going to go ahead and distribute, and that's going to become plus 3w squared minus 27w. I do have like terms, and I want to put it in standard form, so I'm going to put that one first because it has the highest degree of 2. And then 10w minus 27w is negative 17w, w minus 9. Now, I could try to factor this and say, well, that's w times 3w minus 17 to see if that would cancel, but it doesn't because this is also a polynomial, and they must be identical before we can cancel. So we can leave it in this or in this form. Okay, that's it for today. Let me know what questions you have when we get to the start of class. Identifying the common denominator can be quite confusing. So let me know what questions you have when we start working on IXL.